Nobel Prize laureate in physics, Sir Geoffrey Hinton. He is just a hero of mine. Thank you very much. Thank you for your work. And of course, the show is doing the interviews, doing the Economist tech at Alliance. Thank you. The place is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome. I don't think I need to make much of an introduction, but I was thinking how to introduce Jeff. And you've already heard he's a Nobel Prize laureate, so what can you say more than that? Well, let me talk about the science. Well, I'm Alok Jha, Science Editor at The Economist, and it's my pleasure to facilitate this conversation with Geoffrey. So Geoffrey is a British-Canadian computer scientist, cognitive psychologist, known for his work in artificial neural networks, and as you've heard, and as all the paraphernalia around this shows, he's also known as one of the godfathers of AI, which maybe you can talk to me about later. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, and for 10 years from 2013 he also worked for Google, which he left in 2023. Geoffrey, really nice to meet you. It's a really pleasure to have you here. I just want to start with a bit of a vision from you. So here I'm talking about all the companies and the technology.
No.
Okay. I'll shout if necessary. Anyway, they're all talking about the companies, the practical uses, but I'd like to start from you with some vision. So, can you, in the most broad terms possible, tell me what the two or three most hopeful things you think AI will be doing in the next decade? What are the most exciting things for you? In each case, would you mind just giving a sense of what you think actually happened in those things, a concrete example?
Okay, so there's nothing new in what I'm going to say. I think that AI will be amazing in healthcare. So in healthcare, I made a prediction in 2016 that in the next 5 years, AI would replace radiologists in interpreting medical scans.
How's that going?
I was wrong. I got the timescale wrong. It's beginning to happen now. Right now, I think there's over 250 applications approved by the FDA for using AI for interpreting medical scans. It's used in major cancer clinics. I think it would still be another 5 years before it's replaced radiologists, maybe even longer. The medical profession is quite conservative. But it will be able to get more information out of medical scans. So one case we know about is interpreting fundus images of the retina, where AI can see all sorts of things in those images that no ophthalmologist ever realized could be seen there.
What about radiologists? What happens to them? Can they just treat more people, or do they disappear altogether?
So radiologists will still do many other things, like comfort people, plan what to do, although AI will of course be doing that as well. For quite a while it will be a combination of a radiologist and an AI, and that will be more efficient than a radiologist alone. But the good news about healthcare is it's very elastic. If we can make doctors more efficient, we can all get a lot more healthcare. Yeah. So there won't be unemployment, there'll just be a lot more healthcare, which will be great.
That's a good thing. And in healthcare as well, apart from radiology, do you see other places like diagnosis, diseases perhaps that can be made more treatable by them?
There's two things there. Diagnosis will get much better. We already know from more than a year ago that if you take difficult cases to diagnose, then AI gets about 50% right, and the doctors only get about 40% right. The combination gets about 60% right, and that will save a lot of lives. In North America, about 200,000 people a year die of bad diagnoses. So it'll have a big effect there, and that's from AI from more than a year ago. So it'll get much better at that. It'll also, of course, be better at designing drugs. So we'll get much better treatments.
We're already seeing some of the early stage drugs designed by AI going through clinical trials. There is an exciting time for that, and speeding up clinical trials as well. So that's one area, medicine and healthcare. As if that wasn't enough, is there another one you want to talk about?
Yes, the next area is education. So my university doesn't like me talking about this, but AI will be much better at tutoring people. So we already know that if you take a child and give them a personal tutor, they learn about twice as fast as in a classroom. And that's because the personal tutor understands what it is the child doesn't understand and tailors their explanations to what the child's understanding. AI should be able to do that even better, because AIs will have had experience with millions of children to train them. This will come in the next 10 years or so. It's not there yet, but it's coming. And so we'll get much better education at many levels. I think the last level where that will happen is educating PhD students, because that's more an apprenticeship. It's not so much teaching facts as teaching approaches, but it'll come there in the end too. We're already seeing it in companies for educating employees. So I work with a company called Valence that has a system called Nadia that teaches employees leadership skills. And we're going to see in all companies, I think, AI being used to educate employees. When I was at Google, I used to have to do training videos, which were very boring, on how to be polite and things.
Did they work?
To some extent, yes. I think interacting with an AI tutor would actually be much more efficient and less boring.
People can attest to that in this room probably as well, having just tried out, tried out chatbots and things to ask questions. Obviously you have to be careful what you believe, but it's a good start right, already. You can see where it's going. Give us one more hopeful case, the one that you think is going to be one of the most optimistic and visionary things that AI will be doing in the next 10 years.
So I agree with Dennis Hassabis, the leader of DeepMind, who for many years has said AI is going to be very important for making scientific progress. It's going to make scientific discoveries. There's one area in which that's particularly easy, which is mathematics. Because mathematics is a closed system. So you're going to get AIs that play mathematics. That is, they ask themselves, I wonder if I could prove this, I wonder if I could prove that. And because it's a closed system, they can just try things out and see if they can prove them.
So we're talking the mathematical conjectures that are still yet to be proven by humans.
Yes.
They'll be amenable to this.
And new conjectures they'll make too. And I think AI will get much better at mathematics than people, maybe in the next 10 years or so. And within mathematics, it's much like things like Go or chess, that are closed systems with rules, where they can generate their own training data. So when they first taught Go to AIs, they would mimic the moves of human experts. And there's of course a limitation to that, which is you run out of human expert moves, and humans are only so good. But then they got what they call Monte Carlo rollout, where you say, if I go here, he goes there, I go here, he goes there, oh whoops, that's bad for me. And you can learn from the Monte Carlo rollout, and you no longer need humans to tell you what good moves are, you can figure it out. It'll be the same in mathematics, and we'll get mathematical systems much better than people, I believe. And
they don't need breaks or food to eat, you just carry on continuously and get to solutions much faster than humans might before they get tired, right?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah. I mean, in general, mathematics is something you think will be amenable to this, but is science in general, research in general, so physics, chemistry, molecular biology, all of these things you think be accelerated by the neural networks in the future?
Yes, I think what we'll see is little bits of those scientific enterprises be accelerated early on. And as time goes by, more and more aspects will be accelerated, yes.
And what
was a surprise? So if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have confidently predicted we wouldn't have chatbots you could talk to about anything. We wouldn't have a system like GPT-4 or Gemini 2.5 where it's a not very good expert at everything. That would have seemed extraordinary. I'd have said that was way further off. And we certainly wouldn't have systems that could do complicated reasoning. And now we have, the reasoning is getting up to human levels. So I've been very impressed with chain of thought reasoning and with using reinforcement learning to learn the chain of thought reasoning rather than having to have people demonstrate the chain of thought reasoning. And this has completely changed our model of what reasoning is about. So for many, many years, AI was dominated by symbolic AI, which thought that reasoning was the essence of intelligence, but was completely convinced that the way to do reasoning is like logic. You have to take English sentences and convert them into some kind of logical form to which you can apply symbolic rules to derive new logical forms. And that's what reasoning was going to be like. And they were so convinced about that, they didn't really think it was a hypothesis. They thought that's just how it has to be. That's just fact, yes. And those people now have withdrawn to saying, well, we're going to have hybrid systems. We're not going to be able to do reasoning, until you have a hybrid system where you use AI to convert reality into the kind of thing that these logical systems can deal with. You take messy reality and convert it to that. And then these logical systems do the reasoning. So there's still a movement that says we need hybrid neural net symbolic AI. I think this is complete nonsense. I think chain of thought reasoning has shown that the reasoning is all done in English by systems that know how to understand English. And understanding English does not consist of converting English sentences into logical forms. I can try and give you a model of what I think it does consist of. And so I'm going to try and give you a model of what's happening when these big chatbots understand English, or whatever your language is.
Does it work for all languages, what you're about to say?
Yes. And I'm going to assume that they operate on words, although they operate on word fragments, because it's easier to describe if they operate on words. So, rather than taking a sentence made of words and converting that into an unambiguous logical form, what they do is take these word symbols and convert the word symbols into big vectors of neural activity, big sets of active features. And of course, you can't always decide what set of active features you use for a word, because it depends on context. If I give you the word may, that could be a month, it could be a woman's name, or it could be a modal like would or should. And so you don't initially know how to convert it into a big set of features. So you sort of hedge your bets. And then use multiple layers of neural net to gradually disambiguate it, to clean it up by interacting with the feature vectors for other words in the context. And once you've turned these words into the right feature vectors, that is understanding. Now, the interactions are quite complicated that create the right feature vectors. So let's take an example where we understand modeling. If I take any distribution of 3D matter, I can model it up to a certain accuracy by using Lego blocks. I can take the shape of a Porsche. If I'm not worried about the shape of the surface, I can model that shape quite nicely with Lego blocks. So Lego blocks can model any 3D distribution of matter up to a certain resolution. Words are like Lego blocks, but for modeling anything. So Lego blocks are three-dimensional. Words have feature vectors that are maybe 1,000-dimensional, so they're much more complicated. What's more, each Lego block, each word, has a name, which is the name of the word, but that doesn't totally determine the shape. In Lego, you have different shapes of Lego blocks, but they're not deformable. With words, they're deformable, and they deform to fit in with the other words in the context. So that gives you shades of meaning. Also, the way they interact is more complicated than Lego blocks. So Lego blocks, you have a little plastic cylinder that goes into a little plastic hole, and that's it. With words, if you want a model of what's going on in chatbots, think of each word as like a high-dimensional Lego block that's got an approximate shape, but that will deform to fit in with the other words. And think of the Lego block as covered with little hands. And if you deform the Lego block, the shapes of these hands changes. And they have to shake hands with other Lego blocks. And they have to choose which other Lego blocks to shake hands with. That's called attention. Multi-head attention is these multiple hands. And so, for a normal person, a good model of what's going on is the names of the words tell you which Lego blocks to use. The Lego blocks are deformable, and they deform around to try and shake hands with other Lego blocks in the context to make a nice structure. Once they've done that, that's understanding. And you can see it's quite like the protein folding problem. With proteins, you have a bunch of amino acids, and you have to figure out what shape they're all going to make. Which amino acids shake hands with each other amino acids. So, understanding is much more like protein folding than it is like turning each sentence into a logical form. So the whole model that linguists and symbolic AI people have had of understanding is just wrong.
You think it's neural networks all the way?
It's neural networks all the way. And the people who say we need hybrid neurosymbolic systems are the old-fashioned people who used to believe in symbolic systems, want to retain some of that. And they're a bit like people who make petrol engines. If you take people who make petrol engines, but actually electric motors are better, they might come back and say, we agree, electric motors are great. What we're going to do is we're going to use electric motors to inject the petrol into the engine. That's what neurosymbolic AI is like.
Okay, well,
Progress is being made in robotics. They're making things that have a sense of touch. I think Amazon recently had something. It took over a company called Covariant, and I suspect this comes from Covariant, but they have very good AI for physical manipulation, and combine a sense of touch, and you get very good things for picking out the right Amazon product to put in the box.
I mean, the idea of a dark warehouse where there's no people working, it's just robots, it's not even science fiction anymore. There are those things. I suppose they're still dangerous for humans to operate in because robots aren't good enough. At some point, human-robot interaction will be able to happen if the robots are better.
Yes.
Can I ask you about some bits of the hype and buzzwords that people talk about these days? So 2025 was always going to be the age, or the year rather, of agentic AI. AIs that can be agents that can do things in the world. There are many companies selling products. We're told that you can set your LLM off to book your holidays, not quite yet, but soon. What's your opinion of this? Is this actually something real? Or is it a little bit of hype?
I think it's real. I think we're seeing it. I think we're even seeing agents interact with other agents, which is slightly scary.
What useful things are they doing?
Let's see. If I was still doing research, I would probably know all the details of this. I just read about it. Agents can do things like make bookings on the web. I assume agents will pretty soon have your credit card number and be able to just buy things for you. Agents can interact with other agents to do quite sophisticated planning. So we are getting agents, it's not just hype. And in general, I've lived through many years of people talking about AI hype, and in the 80s, when we started using backpropagation, we were very enthusiastic and we got sort of slightly ahead of ourselves, and we thought fairly soon we'd be able to do lots of things we couldn't do for a while. So there was hype there. But my overall opinion is in the last few years, if anything, AI has been underhyped.
Because of the rate it's going at? So this is my next question. People talk about the scaling laws, more computing, more innovation, more money going into these things, more clusters of computers being built, more chips. So if you just keep doing more, you'll get even faster, get further even faster. Do you think there's a limit to this?
There is a limit unless you can generate your own training data. So with language models, most of the data in the world is siloed in companies. The freely available data has largely been used up. And so they are beginning to hit a limit. They're also hitting a limit where the amount of progress you make by scaling up is logarithmic. To get one extra little bit of performance, you need to double the amount of data and double the amount of computation. The next bit you double again. So that's hitting a limit, and it's hitting an energy limit now. But for things that can generate their own data, you're not going to get a data limit. And I think even things like language models will be able to generate their own data by using reasoning. They'll be able to say, I believe this and I believe that. I can do some reasoning and say, so I ought to believe that, but I don't believe this other thing. So now something needs to be fixed. I need to fix one of the premises, or I need to fix the conclusion, or I need to fix the way I do the reasoning, but I can get a gradient to change things. And that's how things like AlphaGo learn to be much better than people, and it's how language models may learn to be much smarter than people.
I'm curious to know if you think there are foundational architectures that will change or need to be developed to sort of push beyond that one difficulty that you still talk about, which is that to get better, you have to double the amount of data. You have to keep doing that. Of course, you can keep doing that. But are there other architectural things in the next few years or the next decade that you hope either will come, or problems that you think might be solved by changes in architecture that you think and need to happen to really push this forward?
So I think there's two things here. We know that there's still lots and lots of progress that can be made by doing better engineering. And DeepSeek was a wonderful example of that. DeepSeek did better engineering to make use of old NVIDIA chips, and they did better engineering in the training. They did sort of piggyback on big chatbots trained with much more compute power. So there's engineering improvements will continue to happen, and so will allow us to do the same thing for less energy. But inevitably there will be scientific breakthroughs. They're almost impossible to predict. We don't know when they'll happen. But I don't believe that things like transformers, which Google produced in 2017, made a big difference. I don't believe that's the last big breakthrough we'll get. We'll get other big breakthroughs in the architectures, as well as big breakthroughs in how to use those architectures. Like the recent idea that you should do much more computation at test time. So the computation isn't all in the training, and then at test time you do some fixed thing. You actually can do research at test time. That's making a big difference. But there will certainly be more breakthroughs in the architectures that we haven't thought of yet.
Tell me about short-term memories that LLMs might have. We've talked about this before, actually. I'm curious to know why you think models need a short-term memory and what they can do with it.
Okay, so for quite a long time in neural nets, people's view of how you would deal with sequences were that you would have a recurrent neural net, and the recurrent neural net, all its information about the past of the sequence would be stored in the activation states of the hidden neurons. And these activation states change with each word. And so those are the things that are changing rapidly. And then there'll be things that change slowly, which are the connection strengths, that determine how the input word and the current activation strengths lead to the activation strengths in the next time step. That's a recurrent neural net. For many years, people thought that's the way it's going to go. Then transformers came along and said, no, look, we're going to keep all the previous activity states, and we're going to allow the current word to look at all those previous activity states. So we're keeping around hugely more context. And that worked much better. Now if you ask, well, how could the brain possibly do that? The brain can't possibly keep around all the previous activations of the neurons. It's only got the same neurons. So how does it get that kind of hugely rich context? And it's clear the only way it can do that is by having memory in short-term connection strengths. So the classic neural net model says, you have neural activities that change fast as the data comes in. You have connection strengths that change very slowly and learn over many, many sequences. And that's it, there's just two time scales. But you can't do transformers in a real neural net like that. You have to have a third time scale at least, which is that you're going to take your connection strengths and you have an overlay on those connection strengths that we call fast weights, which rapidly changes the connection strengths in a way that decays rapidly and can contain much more information than the neural activities. Thousands of times more information than neural activities. And that's the real context these neural nets are operating in. That's what must be going on in the human brain to do anything at all like what transformers are doing. It gives you a hugely richer context. So that's a nice case where progress in AI that looks very unneural has actually led to progress in the way people think about how the brain is handling sequences. It must be having temporary changes in connection strengths to act as a big context.
So fast weights, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
That's the thing to look out for in the next few years. And just one more bit on the science before we talk about the sort of safety aspects of all this, which is you started your career trying to understand the human brain, and you've ended up in this place where you've created essentially a version of that in silicon. Do you still get fascinated by the brain itself, the human brain? And what do LLMs in the latest generation, like neural networks, tell you about our own brains?
So actually, yes, I had a career that's designed to understand how the brain computes, and I failed. But in that failure, we produced other stuff. In our attempts to model the brain, we produced things that learn using backpropagation. I now believe that the brain probably doesn't use backpropagation. The brain is solving a somewhat different problem from these large chatbots. In the large chatbots, you have trillions of training examples, and you only have of the order of 1 trillion connections. Your brain is very different. Your brain has 100 trillion connections, but you only live for a couple of billion seconds, slightly more, which is lucky for me, but only a couple of billion seconds, and so you don't get much training data. So the brain is solving the problem of, with very limited training data, how do we learn using huge numbers of connections? The AIs are still solving the problem of, with a huge amount of training data, how do we learn using not many connections, where not many is now trivial? The backpropagation learning algorithm, which all these systems use, is great for solving that problem. How do you squeeze lots of information into not many connections? And that's why things like GPT-4 knows thousands of times more than any person, even though it's only got a few percent as many connections. The brain is obviously, I think, obviously using some different learning algorithm. Nobody knows how the brain is learning. We can do backpropagation in somewhat neurally plausible terms, but only for small systems. It doesn't work for big systems. We still don't know how the brain learns, but I suspect it's not backpropagation. It's something that's optimized for having many, many connections and not much training data.
Fascinating.
Let me just tell you the difference in analog and digital. The inner loop of all these models consists of taking the activity of a simulated neuron and multiplying it by connection strength to get the input to some other neuron. That multiplication of a neural activity by connection strength is done by turning them both into strings of bits. So a 16-bit number for the neural activity, a 16-bit number for the connection strength. Multiplying those two numbers together, which takes them the order of 256, 16 squared bit operations. And each of those operations has to be done at high power because you want a reliable answer. That's expensive in energy. There's a different way to do it, which is saying, let's make the neural activity just be a voltage. And let's make the connection strength just be a conductance. And then per unit time, a voltage times conductance is a charge. And the neuron that's collecting all these things will just add up charge. Charge adds itself. So we can do this computation with much less energy. And that indeed is what the brain does. That's how the brain does these computations with neurons. The problem is you get a slightly different answer each time, because it's analog. And different analog hardware will get you slightly different answers. So it's no use me taking my connection strengths, which are designed for my hardware, and giving them to you to use in your hardware. It doesn't work. Your brain's wired differently. What we have is systems that learn in analog hardware. You can generate the hardware much more cheaply because it doesn't need to be totally reliable. The learning will take care of all its problems and weaknesses and idiosyncrasies. But when the hardware dies, the knowledge dies. The knowledge is in the connections. When your hardware dies, your knowledge dies.
Unless I've written it down somewhere.
Yes, unless you can convey it to other people. And we can exchange knowledge, but very inefficiently, as I'm illustrating now. I produce sentences, you try and change the connection strengths in your brain so you might have said the same thing. That conveys just a few bits per second. There's only about 100 bits in a sentence. These digital systems, they pay a huge price in energy for two different copies of the hardware doing exactly the same thing if they have the same weights on them, even if it's different hardware. But the advantage of that is I can take a chatbot, I can take the weights in the chatbot, I can put the same weights on 1,000 different pieces of hardware, I can have them all look at 1,000 different pieces of the internet, each one looks at one piece. But as they're doing this, they keep sharing their weights. They keep averaging their weights or their weight gradients. And because it's digital, the weights mean exactly the same to each of them. So they really can average their weights. We can't do that. Because they can average their weights, they're sharing information at trillions of bits every time they do the averaging, if they've got 1 trillion weights. And that's how they learn so much. That's how they get through so much data. Even if they're not fast than us, even if quite slow. Like when they're doing robotics, they're quite slow. So how can they learn so much? Well, you can have thousands of copies learning at the same time and sharing what they learn. And that's going to be the same for agentic AI. Even though it may be operating in the real world, so it may be quite slow. So you can't put the data through it faster, because it's doing reinforcement learning in the real world. Because you can have many copies with the same weights, and they can share what they learn, it can just learn much more than a person ever could. And that, I came to the conclusion that these digital systems are actually a better form of intelligence for people because they can share what they learn. You can have many copies. And they're immortal. You can destroy all the hardware, but as long as you kept a copy of the weights somewhere, just rebuild more hardware that executes exactly the same instruction set, and now it's come to life again. It's immortal. Of course, old white men have dreamt for a long time of putting themselves on computers digital. Marvin Minsky dreamt about that. Kurzweil dreams about that. That's never going to happen. We're analog. We're immortal. We solved the problem of immortality, but it's only for digital systems. You can't convert analog systems like us into digital systems.
Well, that's exciting and also worrying in some ways.
It's very worrying.
And let me move on to that in the last few minutes. You left Google in 2023 to be able to speak more openly about your concerns. Given that you helped to create this technology, what is it about it that worries or concerns you the most as you see it taking off exponentially?
So we're still very primitive in a lot of our beliefs. A lot of us have primitive pre-scientific beliefs, but science has developed so far that we're now able to create alien beings. With agentic AI, we're creating beings, and we have very little idea what's going to happen. Most of the researchers I know, in fact nearly all the researchers I know, believe that we're going to create things much more intelligent than ourselves. They differ on the time scale. Some people believe it's going to be in the next couple of years, which I think is crazily optimistic. Some people think it may take 50 years. I think it's going to be faster. I think it's going to be between 10 and 20 years before we have things more intelligent than ourselves.
Do you mean AGI, that sort of phrase that people use?
I prefer to just talk about superintelligence. AGI sometimes means things more intelligent, sometimes equally intelligent. As soon as we get things equally intelligent, they quickly get more intelligent. So let's talk about things definitely more intelligent than us in almost everything. We're going to create them. We don't know how to keep them safe. We don't know enough about alien beings to know, will they really have desires of their own that are quite different from ours? Will we be able to design it so they won't just take over from us? We know very few examples of much more intelligent things being controlled by much less intelligent things. We have many examples in human society of slightly dumber things controlling slightly more intelligent things. Every professor will talk about that. But we don't have examples for big gaps. We're currently in the situation of someone who has a very cute tiger cub. And tiger cubs are great, and they're not as powerful as you are, and they're just fine. But they're going to grow up. And unless you can be very sure they're not going to want to kill you, you should worry. You should be working very hard now on how to ensure they're not going to want to kill you. And we're not. We are putting very little effort, compared with the effort going into progress, into how can we make things more intelligent than us that will be benevolent. We just don't know how to do it, and we should be putting a lot of work into that. The big companies aren't going to do it because they're after short-term profits. They're legally required to go after short-term profits. At least the public ones. The countries aren't going to do it because they're competing with each other in the short term. I don't have a way of... There's not a good solution to this. With climate change, there's a good solution. Just stop burning carbon and you'll be fine. The oil companies don't want to do it, but maybe we can persuade them in the end. With this, the best I can suggest is that people put pressure on governments to put pressure on the big companies to do much more work on AI safety. I don't think we're going to slow it down. There's so many good uses, and there's so many different competitors, that if one lot slowed it down, the other lot will keep going. So, for example, Musk signed the petition some time ago that we should take a 6-month pause. I think that was probably so Musk could catch up. I didn't sign that petition because I think there's no hope of taking a pause. There's too much competition and too much immediate payoff. So what we have to do is put a lot of work into how to develop it safely. It's not clear that we can. We may be toast. But if we can develop it safely, it would be a shame if we are toast because we failed to work on it.
You may be toast. I'm going to not let that hang. I believe there are some questions in the audience. So if whoever's got the microphone can just have them ready, please. We've got a few minutes, so 1 minute if you can just get the questions, and then yeah, you've got 2 minutes to answer them. Please go. Tell us who you are as well.
I'll be handing over the questions. My name is Fleur, can be one of the stage hosts, and I have a few questions. The first one I would like to offer to the president of Mozilla.
Hi, Professor Hinton, great to hear you. Like you, I'm a Toronto resident. I wanted to pick up on that last question, because it feels like we're in a bit of a prisoner's dilemma on how we do safety and governance, which is, do we trust a few players, whether we can pressure those big companies or lean on governments and lock things down? So we invest in safety and we trust them to look after it, or whether we open it up to all of humanity and sort of trust that collectively will yield that investment in safety. And so how do you thread that balance?
Okay, the idea of opening up to all humanity sounds like open sourcing.
It might be what I mean.
But When you open source a big model and give people the weights, that's not at all like, open weights is not like open source. Open source, you get thousands or millions of people looking at lines of code and saying, wait a minute, there's a problem here. You don't get people looking at the weights and saying, this weight should be a little bit bigger. You get people using that open source model and training it, refining it to do something bad like cyber attacks or like making biological weapons. Because it's much easier to refine a model than it is to train it. So my belief is that open sourcing weights is a bit like making fissile material free. The reason we don't all have atom bombs is because it's hard to get fissile material. There's other problems, but that's the main problem. That's expensive. Open sourcing weights is like making fissile material free, so I think that's crazy. I think we have to, and I don't think we can rely on the big companies. The only route I can see to make it safe against the existential threat is to have people pressure governments to regulate companies and force the companies to do a lot of work on safety.
Great, thank you.
One more question from the audience, and we've got 1 minute. Where's the microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Here you are. One more. Jeff, you've got 50 seconds if you can see that.
Okay.
50 seconds, okay. So Christian Darby from Diffusion Films. I was very interested in what you were saying about the speed of development and like that. And given that it looks like we're getting AGI very soon, and by AGI I'm talking about computers that can do basically what we can do in the workplace, basically as well as we can do it in almost every field. And given that it looks like hundreds of...
Have you got a question?
Yeah, yes, I have. Yeah. What does an economy look like when it hasn't got any jobs in it?
That's a big problem that we have to solve. So some economists will tell you that new technology will create new jobs. But this technology will replace mundane intellectual human labour in much the same way as machines replace people who dig ditches. People don't dig ditches anymore, machines do. And digging ditches isn't a good job career. I think there's going to be massive job losses, that's my personal opinion. And governments have to figure out what to do about it. A good first step is things like universal basic income so people don't starve. But that doesn't solve the problem of human dignity, because a lot of people feel their worth is related to the job they do. We don't know what to do about that. It's kind of crazy because a huge increase in productivity, which AI will give us, should be good for all humanity. And if the wealth was spread equally, it would be. But what's going to happen is the people who lose their jobs will get poorer, and the people who fire them will get richer. And that's going to be terribly bad for society. We know that that gap between the rich and the poor is what makes societies violent, and we'll see a lot more of that.
Thank you very much. Sorry. He's a rock star, ladies and gentlemen, and rock stars have to leave. It's always the same like that. If you try to have a selfie with Mick Jagger, it's difficult. If you like a selfie with Bruno Mars, it's difficult. If you want a selfie with Beyonce, it's even more difficult. And this is Geoffrey Hinton, and he is topping a new government, new chancellor, doing new things. And as you all know, as you might have heard, Germany is off copyright, but in terms of digitization, we were, let's say, not full up to speed. We just took it slow. And we are very pleased to have on this very stage the guy who was actually picked to run things.
Sorry guys, if you could just, he has a very urgent agenda.